All right. Yeah. I just want to say before we play this, Kshama Sawant, it was great to talk with her.
Hmm.
Yeah, she's a figure like David mentioned earlier, who was one of the original like, project. You know, it's one of many things in politics that reminds me of Michael because I remember like when I was new to Majority Report and we were talking about different models of this. She was one of the only people who had done it. This is pre
Hmm.
Bernie, right? Like, and so a lot of respect for her and a lot of disdain and indignant aim towards the people trying to recall her. And if
Hmm.
there's anything you want to say, David, before we run this, you can go ahead.
No, this is definitely, if you're interested in helping out Kshama Sawant and the movement, we put in the description of the video, the Shama Solidarity links, so that you can get involved. And this is a really fun interview, and just not to tease too much, but definitely is going to be the first of many. We had a really fun conversation after the interview was recorded, planning out some more content down the line. So look forward to that too.
All right, here you go, folks. We'll see you in a half hour with Wozni Lam.
By Councilmember Kshama Sawant, who is somebody whose political work I've been following for a very long time. It's a real great honor to be able to speak with her today. And thank you so much, Kshama, for joining us today on Left Reckoning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there's something that we have to talk about, and I think we're going to focus on for the majority of this interview. Since you've been elected to the city council in Seattle, you've been involved in a lot of high-profile fights. To stand up for working people, to stand up for unhoused folks, and to stand up against our incredibly racist criminal justice system. And in that process, you've made a lot of powerful enemies. And there is yet again another kind of astroturfed movement to remove you from office. Could you talk about basically what's happening and the actors behind this recall movement?
Absolutely. As you were correctly saying, David, there's a recall campaign against my council office, and that is very much being promoted by the right wing, by big business, by the establishment here in this city. The recall has 4 charges. They claim that I've broken the law. Let me be perfectly clear right from the get-go. I have broken no law whatsoever. All those charges are based in falsehood. And I think the recall campaign itself brings up a larger question about the Washington state law on recall, which does not require the truth to be tested in those recall charges. Unfortunately, and every time I tell people about this, people are amazed that that's true, but that is indeed true. In fact, the recall law in this state is specifically written such that it allows wealthy people and the ruling class to have a do-over of election results that they do not like. And it really is a way in which they can use the legal system against working class elected representatives. And we are seeing that play out right now. And it's no coincidence that 2 of those 4 charges are directly related to my commitment to the Black Lives Matter movement. And it is situated in the larger context of the real backlash from the ruling class against the nationwide Black Lives Matter movement. It's not a coincidence, for example, that 14,000 BLM activists faced arrests last year. And so if this recall succeeds, they will absolutely use it as a template against other movement leaders and against the movement as a whole. And bottom line is, as you were suggesting, this is an attack on us because they don't want a successful example of an elected office that truly stands with movements and not just expresses that in rhetoric, but has an overwhelming track record of victory after victory, everything from $15 an hour to the Amazon tax. But those bookends, also including the ferocious fight back and victories that we have won for renters like no other council office in any recent history in Seattle. And so that's what the ruling class is fighting against, a successful example of encouragement for working people elsewhere. And it's understandable also why they would do it, why they are afraid, because the 15 Now movement, for example, that we launched here, that went nationwide. The Tax Amazon movement that we launched here, that is also now going to other cities.
And I just have to note as well, because we cover a lot of events here, global politics on Left Reckoning. And this is just another example of what, we would call in South America lawfare, right? Where you can't beat somebody at the ballot box, but you try to find ways to use the legal system to undermine a democratic, victories. Here in Austin, Texas, it's a very different kind of move, but you're seeing again where people voted to significantly pull back the budget for the police in Austin. And now there's basically another AstroTurf campaign that has popped up, to put, to basically undo all of that work in an off-year election in May, right? These tactics aren't just, unique to one area. They very much are being seen across the board. But just for folks who might not be familiar with what happened in Seattle over the past 6 months with the Black Lives Matter movement, could you sort of set the scene a little bit?
Yes. If you look at the last 4 years or 5 years since the original BLM movement started really coming out on the streets in 2014, 2015, believe it or not, at that time, I was the only elected representative in Seattle who was willing to publicly say Black Lives Matter. And 2014 was our first year in office. I was first elected in 2013. Since then, we've won 2 re-elections. But at that time, it was at such a point where no Democrat was willing to say that publicly. But now the movements have come so far, and especially the street protests last year laid down a serious political marker with 26 million people going out on the streets in multiracial working class solidarity against racism, against police violence. And really, the protests also captured the overall anger of the younger generations at the system that is not working for them at all. And so that really scared the ruling class. I mean, nothing scares the ruling class under capitalism more than working class people of different races and ethnicities, different genders coming together in solidarity. That solidarity is what scares them. And so at the height of the street protest, you saw Democratic establishment mayors and city council members, whether it was Seattle or Minneapolis or Boston or New York or Los Angeles or Austin, you saw endless promises from the Democrats about defunding the police, bringing in police accountability, really standing with Black Lives Matter. And not a day goes by now that a politician does not say Black Lives Matter. You saw Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer wearing kente cloth and on their knees. So you're seeing a lot of the what I think some in the movement might call performative politics that are supposed to represent real solidarity with BLM. But what did we see actually happening? So Seattle is a good example. So is Minneapolis. In the summer during the protests, we had 7 of the 8 council members, or maybe 6 of the 8 council members. There are 9 council members in the city. They are all Democrats. I'm a socialist. So virtually every council member said Black Lives Matter, pledged to defund the police by at least 50%, because that was the force of the movement, really, making it clear that if you didn't make those promises, there's going to be a real political price extracted from you. But then what happened just a few months later in the autumn, virtually every promise was backtracked on. And who was the only elected representative, only elected office that stood strong with the promise, but not only that, was still building on the streets to really win it? It was our Socialist Council office. So you saw promises on defunding being reneged. In fact, just yesterday, believe it or not, at a city council committee, a minimal promise of not allowing the Seattle Police Department to take home $5.4 million in extra overtime dollars. Even that was defeated by the Democrats. It's just stunning the degree to which these promises to the Black Lives Matter movement have been betrayed. And another stunning example, in the height of the street protests, through my office, through the BLM movement, we were able to win a first in the nation historic ban on police use of weapons like tear gas, rubber bullets, plastic bullets, sonic, ultrasonic weapons, all these heinous weapons that are being used against peaceful protest movements and really against the left. We were able to win a ban against that, despite the both open and behind the scenes opposition of all these Democratic council members, because the movement was demanding it. I mean, it was incredible to watch hundreds of people angrily demanding in public testimony. That's why we won it. Well, guess what happened in February, just last month? Most of the ban was gutted, and that happened because there hasn't been a street movement. So anyway, long story short, what is the moral of this story that we on the left, we in movements have to take from this? What is the lesson for us? Is that we need mass movements on the streets. And it is through these movements that we need our own elected representatives who are not going to get elected and then sell out.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment a little bit about more of your track record on big business? Obviously, go into the Amazon tax and talk about a bit of the money that you're coming up against that is also behind this recall effort.
Yeah, as you said correctly, Matt, in the 2019 election, it was quite a historic and unprecedented event where for one city council race, so much money was spent by the Chamber of Commerce. And you mentioned the Amazon $1 million money bomb in the last weeks of the election in order to try and not only defeat me, obviously that was the biggest prize that they wanted, defeating Socialist Alternative and driving socialists out of City Hall, but also they went after even minimally progressive council candidates because they wanted to do an entire sort of corporate takeover of City Hall, which they simply didn't succeed in, and working people delivered a resounding defeat to Jeff Bezos and the billionaires. But since they couldn't defeat us in the re-election, less than a year after we won the re-election, they launched a recall campaign. And if you look at the billionaire donors, and there are many billionaire donors to this recall campaign, you have odious figures like Martin Seelig, for example, who is a billionaire. He's an ICE landlord. He owns the building where the Seattle office of ICE is located. And he donated big amounts of money to Donald Trump. We also have, notably, many real estate billionaires who have donated both to Trump and to Biden. So I think that's also a really telling that while there are differences between the Republican and Democratic parties, at the end of the day, the establishments of both parties serve the same Wall Street interests. And so you'll see many of these billionaires who donate to both the parties because for them, it's just they're hedging their bets. They both those parties represent their interests. So you see that kind of billionaire push behind the recall campaign. And part of these billionaires are also basically real estate billionaires. And the reason is very clear. They are angry. Not only is big business as a whole angry about the specific victories we have won, whether it's $15 an hour or taxing big business to the Amazon tax to fund housing and Green New Deal programs, but it's also the whole host of renters' rights victories that we have won. And it should be made clear that it's not any one policy victory that puts the fear in the ruling class. It's the fact that we have completely transformed Seattle's political landscape by winning victory after victory after victory. And because the basis of those victories was not me being some sort of extraordinary individual, but our office, Socialist Alternative, my organization, us being clear that being rooted in the movement means that you have to use your office as an organizing tool for the movement. And it's the empowering of ordinary people, renters, workers, union members. That is what really brings the force. And that's the power behind the office I hold. It's not me. It's the fact that I'm willing to use my office. And I understand that I have to use my office to empower ordinary people. And just to quote Jamie Durkin, who used to be the top Seattle corporate landlord lobbyist, he happens to be the brother of the current mayor, Jenny Durkin. And you can see all these corporate tentacles running through the Democratic Party. And in fact, Jenny Durkin herself won her campaign with unprecedented amounts of money from Amazon, real estate, Comcast, CenturyLink, and so on. But Jamie Durkin, he recently retired as a lobbyist. And, famously, he said that, when they call council members, the council members, meaning the people who are willing to sell out to the corporate landlord lobby, they'll say, oh, yeah, we'll do what you want to do. Then they come on the dais, and to quote him, he said, these council members are confronted by Sawant's army. And then they forget all the promises made to the corporate landlord. So that's sometimes your enemies in the ruling class can give the movements the best compliments because they know what they are up against. And what he's pointing to is the fact that our office is bringing in this army of organized movements that is making it very clear to the council members, even if you don't stand with us, if you don't vote for our interests, you will pay a political price for it. So take your pick. That's the kind of pressure that we have brought to bear. And that is the kind of pressure we will need to bring if we are to win a federal $15 an hour or Medicare for all at the federal level.
So, yeah, it's so true that, like, one, you can definitely see why, the wealthy and members of the ruling class are very threatened by these kind of social movements with the Democratic Party as well, right? Because, like, as you were saying, you get to expose the symbolism when you have people showing up and saying, we actually want you to do what you said you were going to do in the first place. Just so it doesn't get lost, what is this recall process? And is there a counter movement that y'all are organizing as well?
Yes, the recall process is such that the state Supreme Court has to rule on whether the recall can go forward or not. And we don't believe that the court system under capitalism is any more on our side than is the police or any other institution of the capitalist state. So we are not just waiting, doing nothing till they rule. In fact, months ago, we launched what we have called the Kshama Solidarity campaign. Basically, it's the campaign against this recall campaign to defeat the recall. And we've called it a solidarity campaign because we are making it very clear this is not about me, it's not about my office, and it's not about socialist alternative. This is an attack on the socialist movement as a whole, and it's an attack on working class people. It's a message from the ruling class, from the elite, that you working people, you ordinary people, if you have the temerity to fight back, let alone win something for yourself, we will come and with a backlash against you. And it's also a reflection of how there is no universe where you can fight back and win and then not have the ire of the elite against you, because it highlights that it is a class struggle. This recall against us is a reminder that it is a class struggle. We didn't make it a class struggle. It is posed to us as a class struggle because of the way capitalism functions. And so our alternative is not to fight for anything because there will be a backlash. Our approach should be that we should win those victories and then we should fight against the backlash. But it's important that you all based in Austin are talking about this, because we need national and indeed international solidarity against the recall, because we know this is an attack on the left as a whole. Before we had the second lockdown because of COVID here, we were already doing tabling and door knocking. Of course, we switched to phone banking because we want to make sure it is COVID safe. But once again, our volunteers, the members of the campaign are out there talking to people in the district. And what we are hearing from working people is that they're outraged that there is this recall campaign because they correctly understand it's an attack against them. We also need endorsements from the left from all around the country. So if somebody's watching this and you know there are left leaders, union leaders, community leaders who want to stand with us publicly, we need their voices to be heard as part of this campaign in solidarity against the recall.
Mm-hmm. And so the step would be, though, if the court rules one way, that they would have to collect signatures as well. Am I correct?
Yes. When the
then if they collect that many signatures, that's it. It's a done deal.
No, if the court rules, which is the most likely scenario, that the recall can go forward, that means the recall campaign is then free to collect signatures in order to go on the ballot. If they collect enough signatures to go on the ballot, then, and it's not going to be straightforward because they have to collect thousands of signatures to get on the ballot. But if they do get on the ballot, then it will be an election that will trigger an election where voters will literally vote on it. And so one of the things we're doing in order to educate voters about what this is we have a decline to sign petition, meaning we are educating people about what the recall is about, and then saying that, listen, let's get together, let's unite and decline to sign the recall petition and prevent them from getting on the ballot in the first place. So we need that solidarity in the first place. But if they do get on the ballot, then we will have to fight them at the ballot. One last thing I'll say about this whole process is that partly what they are relying on is that working people are so busy just putting food on the table, paying their rent, that we can't expect every working person who we know supports us is looped into every detail. Some may not even know yet about the recall campaign against us. So in other words, it's not only the recall is not only undemocratic in the sense that it is trying to undo an election result, It's also undemocratic because it is specifically relying on voters not knowing what's happening because they're so busy, not because they're stupid, but because they're so busy just getting their lives on track because of the cost that the pandemic and the recession has extracted from them, while billionaires have become more than $1 trillion richer. And this is not even me speculating. In fact, a spokesperson from the recall campaign went on right-wing radio, which itself is an indication of where they stand. Yeah. But one of the things he freely admitted, probably inadvertently, I don't know, is that they were relying on low information that is available to voters. They were relying on a special election where people wouldn't know there was an election in the first place. So all of this shows how deeply undemocratic the whole process is.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's despicable. And yeah, and again, this is a tactic that we're seeing all across the country, and we'll definitely, point people into ways that they can support. We have people who listen in Washington and also all across the country.